They thought I was finished. They thought the dirt on my boots was all I had left. They thought the farm, the cattle, the land, my life's work, could be stolen with a few papers and a shaky hand. They were wrong. My name's Tom Whitaker. Folks around Maple Hollow just call me Grandpa Tom. I worked these fields for 53 years, from the first rooster's crow to the last whippoorwill's cry. My wife, May, used to say the soil had stained my hands darker than sun ever could. She was right. After she passed, the farm grew quieter. Too quiet. I thought family would fill the silence. I thought the grandchildren would remember who raised their fathers, who built the house they slept in, who carried the debt until the land turned green again. I thought wrong. It started with smiles, soft hands on my shoulders, words dripping with honey. Grandpa, don't you trust us? Grandpa, it's just a formality. Grandpa, we'll take care of you. I signed where they pointed. The ink dried fast, but the betrayal burned slower. Days later, the locks were changed. My own blood told me to pack my things and leave. Leave the house I built with May. Leave the porch where we rocked in summers. Leave the barn that smelled of hay and leather and life. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I just walked out with a canvas bag and my old cane. They thought I went to a shelter, or maybe just curled up and died under some bridge. That suited me fine. Let them think the old man had disappeared. Truth was, I never went far. An old barn on the edge of town still leaned against the wind, half forgotten. Broken boards, rusted hinges, a roof that groaned in every storm. But it was shelter enough. I made it my fortress. Blankets stuffed with straw, a lantern, a stash of canned beans. And in the corner, a crate full of files I'd been keeping for years. Tax slips, receipts, even the letters they'd tried to hide from me. You work a lifetime in one place, you learn where the cracks are. I had 3 grandchildren, 3 wolves in different skins. Ethan, the eldest, ran a car dealership in town. Flashy suits, shiny smile, but debt clung to him like flies on manure. I'd overheard him begging bankers more than once. One push in the wrong direction and his whole empire would topple. Mason, the middle one, liked dice and cards more than his own wife. Gambling wasn't just a hobby for him. It was a hunger. He lost more than he won, and what he won he threw away faster than rain on sand. And Clara, the youngest, pretty as her grandmother, but hollow inside. She measured life in handbags, perfumes, and whispers, always chasing the newest, the loudest, the shiniest. She didn't see people, only props. They wanted my land, my cattle, my money. They thought they'd taken it. But all they had was paper, and paper burns. The first night in the barn, I sat on the hay, listening to the wind rattle the boards. My hands shook, not from fear, but from anger. My cane leaned against the wall, the wood smooth from years of use. I clenched it tight and whispered to the empty dark, "You should have let me rot in peace. Now you'll learn." I started simple. A forged invoice slipped into Ethan's office drawer, the kind that makes a banker twitch. A whisper dropped near Mason's poker buddies, enough to make him sweat when he sat at the table. And for Clara, a neatly folded letter left in her mailbox, stamped with the seal of the IRS. Just paper, just ink. But sometimes that's all it takes to set a house on fire. The barn smelled of dust and old hay, but to me it smelled like revenge. Every creak of the boards was a promise. Every mouse scurrying through the straw was a reminder. Stay quiet. Stay patient. Strike when they least expect. I didn't tell anyone where I was. Not the neighbors, not the pastor, not even Sheriff Randall, who used to stop by for pie on Sundays. Let the world think I was gone. Let my grandchildren toast their victory with champagne in my kitchen. Because while they laughed, I was sharpening the knife they'd feel in the dark. And the first cut was already on its way. I leaned back against the wall, listening to the night settle, and smiled. They had no idea the ghost they'd buried was still breathing. Tomorrow, the games would begin. Ethan always walked like he owned the street. Shiny loafers, tie knotted too tight, smile wide enough to blind. That morning, I watched from across Main Street as he strutted into Holloway Bank, briefcase swinging. He didn't notice me. He wouldn't have looked twice at a man in an old coat leaning on a cane anyway. Good. I wanted it that way. The forged invoice I slipped into his desk 2 weeks earlier had done its job. A single page, marked urgent, stamped with the name of a finance firm Ethan once begged money from. A number circled in red, $180,000 overdue. I'd spent nights hunched under lantern light, copying logos, tracing signatures I'd seen him leave on papers back when he thought I was too old to notice. All it took was sliding it into the stack of real bills. He signed without reading. He always did. Now the bank manager's office door stayed closed too long. Ethan's smile cracked on the way out. His tie looked tighter. Sweat stained the edges of his collar. He didn't stop to shake hands in the lobby. He just walked fast, lips pressed, phone clutched to his ear. I didn't need to hear the words. I could read panic in his gait. The mighty dealer of shiny cars had just been told he might lose them all. Back in the barn, I chuckled to myself. The air smelled of damp straw, sharp and honest. I lit the lantern and opened Mason's file. Poor boy never learned to fold. Every gambling debt, every whispered loan, I tracked for years. He thought the casino in Riverbend kept secrets, but dealers talk. Especially when you slide them a 20 and remind them you once sold them beef at cost during a dry summer. For Mason, I didn't need forged invoices. I needed whispers. I slipped a note into the back pocket of a man named Vance who played poker 3 nights a week at the Ironwood Tavern. A note written in block letters. Mason owes more than he admits. Collect before the others do. Signed with nothing but a smudge of red ink. Looked like a thumbprint. In that circle of sharks, that was enough. By Friday, Mason was pacing outside the tavern, tugging at his sleeves, shouting into his phone. He looked less like a gambler and more like a trapped rat. The news spread quick. Mason's got debt with dangerous folks. I heard one man say at the feed store. Exactly what I wanted. And Clara, sweet Clara. She wore perfume that reached a room before she did. Always posing for photos in front of cars that weren't hers, handbags borrowed, jewels rented. I didn't need to touch her vanity. I only needed to let her believe she was being watched. So I drafted a letter, plain white envelope, typed words, official seal I borrowed from an old tax document of my own. Preliminary audit notification, lifestyle expenditures under review. Failure to respond may result in asset seizure. Nothing but paper, nothing but ink. But when Clara opened it on her marble kitchen counter, she screamed loud enough for the neighbor to hear. I know, because that neighbor called her sister, who told the ladies at the salon, who told half the town. Gossip spreads faster than wildfire. I sat in the barn that night, cane across my knees, lantern glowing low. My heart beat steady, cold. One grandson drowning in fake debt, another sweating over whispered threats, a granddaughter convinced the government had its eyes on her closets full of dresses. None of it real, not yet. But the fear was. And fear is heavier than truth. I could almost hear May's voice in the rafters. Tom, she would have said, you're playing with fire. Maybe I was. But these children had already burned me alive. All I was doing now was lighting their own matches and watching. The best part? They didn't suspect a thing. To them, I was just an old ghost who'd vanished. To me, they were pawns on a board I'd built myself. I leaned back against the wall of the barn, the wood creaking like an old friend. Outside, the cattle lowed in the fields they thought they owned. But paper doesn't feed cattle. Sweat does. And the only man who ever bled for this land was me. Tomorrow, the cracks would widen. Tomorrow, they'd start blaming each other. And I'd be waiting in the shadows, steady as stone. It didn't take long for the whispers to turn into claws. Ethan was the first to snap. Saturday morning, the townsfolk gathered at Miller's Diner for their usual coffee and gossip. I sat 2 booths away, back turned, hat low, cane leaned against the table. Nobody looked twice at me, just another old farmer with weak knees. But I heard every word. Ethan Whitaker's business is sinking, one man said, folding his newspaper with a grin. Banks breathing down his neck. Must be why he tried selling me that busted pickup for twice the price, another chimed in. Laughter spilled over chipped mugs. Ethan stormed in, suit wrinkled, jaw tight. His eyes darted to the men talking. Keep my name out of your mouths, he barked. His voice cracked just enough to show fear. The diner fell quiet. For once, his smile wasn't there to rescue him. He slammed a few bills on the counter and left, shoulders stiff as boards. By afternoon, the news reached Clara. I knew it would. She thrived on gossip, but never when she was the subject. She drove her silver coupe straight to Ethan's dealership, her heels clicking like knives on the showroom floor. "You're dragging the family down," she hissed at him, loud enough for the staff to hear. "First your debts, now my name in a tax audit? Do you know what that does to my reputation?" Ethan blinked. "Audit? What audit?" She waved the letter in his face, hands trembling under her designer rings. "The IRS is circling me because of you." I watched from the sidewalk outside, leaning on my cane as if just resting. Through the glass, their argument looked like a play staged for me alone. His face red, hers pale, both too blinded by pride to see the strings I'd tied around their throats. And Mason? He arrived an hour later, sleeves rolled up, hair messy. His eyes darted to every shadow, every customer. He dragged Ethan by the arm. "We need to talk," he muttered, but his voice shook. "Not here," Ethan snapped. "Here's fine," Mason said louder. "People are saying I owe money to dangerous people. You've been running your mouth?" Clara gasped. "So it is true." Ethan shoved him back. "I've got enough problems without your gambling trash." The three of them stood in the middle of the dealership floor, shouting, spitting accusations like rabid dogs. Customers slipped out quietly. A secretary pulled her phone out, recording. By evening, that video was circling every screen in Maple Hollow. The Whitaker heirs of the great farm empire, clawing at each other like children in a sandbox. Back in the barn, I sat on a bale of hay, the lantern flickering. The air smelled of oil and dust, sharp in my lungs. I pulled out May's old Bible, not for prayer but for the pages I'd hidden inside. Copies of deeds, tax receipts, letters. Proof of every weakness, every crack. I didn't need to use them all. Just enough to turn whispers into war. They thought throwing me out would silence me. Instead, they'd silence themselves. Every word they spat now only proved what I'd always known. Greed rots quicker than milk in the sun. As the wind rattled the loose boards above me, I whispered to the dark, "You wanted the farm, didn't you? Now you'll choke on it." I pictured Ethan pacing in his office, Mason checking shadows like ghosts followed him, Clara tearing through her closet, sure that agents were watching her silk dresses. They weren't watching her. I was. And I was patient. The barn creaked, as if May herself shifted above me. "Don't go too far, Tom." I could almost hear her say. But she wasn't here, and I had no one left to caution me. Only a plan. Tomorrow, I'd tighten the noose. Tomorrow, I'd give them something new to fear, each other. It started with a phone call I wasn't supposed to hear. But in a small town, nothing stays hidden. Mason's voice carried through the cracked window of the tavern when I passed by on my evening walk. "I'll pay, I swear. Just give me a week." His words were frantic, pressed between gulps of whiskey. Then silence, followed by a fist slamming the bar. If Ethan wasn't choking the family funds, I wouldn't be in this mess. So that was his story now. Blame Ethan. Typical Mason, always looking for a scapegoat. I smiled under the brim of my hat. It didn't matter that the dangerous men breathing down his neck were nothing more than ink on a note I'd planted. Mason believed it. And belief is a heavier chain than truth. By the next morning, Clara believed it too. A shiny black SUV pulled into Ethan's driveway. Out stepped Clara in a fur-trimmed coat, eyes blazing. She shoved the fake IRS letter against his chest. "You dragged me into this with your shady loans, Ethan. You want to ruin me? Fine, but you'll go down first." I watched from the hedgerow, crouched with my cane steadying me. Ethan's jaw tightened as he read the letter for the third time. He didn't even notice his neighbor's curtains twitching or the way two teenagers across the street recorded on their phones. "This isn't me," Ethan hissed. "You think I dragged the IRS after you? That's Mason. He's the one bleeding money." Mason arrived minutes later, summoned by Clara's fury. His shirt was half untucked, his eyes wild. "Don't pin this on me," he shouted. "You're the one who forged Dad's signature last year to cover payroll. You think I didn't know?" The word forged hit like a hammer. Ethan's face drained of color. Clara gasped. The whole neighborhood heard. By noon, whispers sprinted through Maple Hollow. Ethan forged signatures, Mason owed criminals. Clara was under federal audit. 3 golden heirs now tarnished by their own tongues. Back in the barn, I sat among the dust and hay, lantern light flickering across my scattered papers. Each sibling had started blaming the other, exactly as I planned. I didn't have to push anymore. They were pushing themselves into the pit. But I wasn't done. Not yet. That night, I crept from the barn with a folded envelope tucked in my coat. My knees screamed with every step, but revenge makes an old man steady. I slid the envelope under Clara's front door. Inside, a copy of Ethan's dealership loan statement. I'd found it years back in a pile of discarded mail he thought no one would notice. The balance due was real enough. I just underlined the numbers in red ink. By sunrise, Clara was storming into the bank, letter clutched like a weapon, demanding answers. Ethan's name got dragged further into the mud. The bank manager's voice carried clear through the glass walls. "Miss Whitaker, this is confidential." She didn't care. By the time she left, half the town knew Ethan was sinking in debt. That same day, Mason found his truck keyed from bumper to bumper. Big block letters scratched deep. "Pay up." He staggered into the tavern, shaking, shouting about enemies. He didn't see me at the corner table, sipping black coffee, face hidden under my cap. He didn't need to. By evening, the 3 of them sat in their father's old living room, doors locked, blinds drawn. Their voices carried through the walls to the porch where I lingered in the shadows. "It's you," Clara spat. "One of you is trying to ruin me. You think I've got time to mess with you?" Ethan shot back. "I'm too busy keeping this family from collapsing." "You're both lying," Mason snarled. "And I swear, if I find out which of you dragged my name into the mud, I'll—" He didn't finish the sentence. A glass shattered. Someone stormed out. I walked back to the barn slowly, my cane tapping against the dirt road. The night air smelled of rain and rot. My chest ached, not from weakness but from something darker, satisfaction. They had turned on each other completely now. They thought they had exiled me. All they did was hand me the strings, and I was pulling them one by one. Tomorrow, I'd tug harder. Tomorrow, betrayal would grow teeth. The storm finally broke on a Tuesday afternoon. Not rain, reputation. Ethan was the first to fall. I'd been waiting for the right moment, holding the dealership's secret like a blade under my coat. Years back, when May was still alive, I'd found letters in the trash. Ethan had padded numbers on sales contracts, forged a few customer signatures to secure loans. At the time, I tucked them away, telling myself blood deserved mercy. But mercy had died the day they locked me out of my own house. I slipped copies of those letters into a plain brown envelope and mailed it to the county inspector. No return address, just enough to make them look twice. By midweek, a shiny black sedan pulled up to Ethan's lot. 2 men in gray suits stepped out, badges flashing. Customers froze. Salesman whispered. And Ethan, my proud, grinning grandson, sweated through his pressed shirt as they escorted him inside. The news spread faster than lightning. By sundown, half the town knew Ethan Whitaker's dealership was under investigation. The video hit local news. Ethan shouting at reporters, face red, denying everything while cameras drank it in. I sat in the barn, lantern low, watching his downfall flicker on an old TV I dug out of storage. Static buzzed around the edges, but the picture was clear enough. The mighty Ethan reduced to stammers and sweat. Mason didn't take it well. He stormed into the tavern that night, drunk, slamming his fists on the bar. "It's Ethan," he shouted. "He's dragging us all under." His poker buddies leaned back, wary. Then one of them muttered loud enough for everyone to hear. "Didn't know you could afford another drink, Mason. Thought the mob was on you." Laughter. Cruel, sharp. Mason swung, fists flying, but he was outnumbered. By the time the sheriff dragged him out, his lip was split, his shirt torn, and his dignity shredded. Clara tried to stay above it all, posting her photos in glossy filters, pretending none of it touched her. But I made sure it did. Another letter, this one slipped to her gossip circle at the salon. Confidential audit, stamped across the top. Same trick as before, only louder. By Friday, the women she thought were her friends were whispering behind her back, asking if her designer shoes were bought with dirty money. I pictured her staring into her gilded mirror, seeing cracks spider across her perfect reflection. Back in the barn, I spread the papers across the floor like cards in a game. Ethan, investigation. Mason, humiliation. Clara, rumors eating her alive. Each weakness exposed, each wound salted. The air smelled of oil and hay, heavy, familiar. I leaned on my cane, steady, calm. But I knew this wasn't enough. They had thrown me out like trash. They had laughed while I packed my bag. They had slammed the door on a man who fed them from his calloused hands. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about balance. They took my home. I'd take theirs, the trust between them, the future they thought was theirs to inherit. So I pushed harder. I left a second envelope on Clara's doorstep, this one thick with photocopies of Ethan's forged contracts. I scrawled in shaky handwriting at the bottom, "Ask your brother what he's been hiding." That evening, their voices shook the neighborhood. Neighbors watched from porches as Clara screamed in the driveway, Ethan bellowing back, Mason stumbling between them, bleeding from last night's fight. Every accusation I planted sprouted into venom on their tongues. The Whitakers, once the proud heirs of the farm, were a circus act under streetlights. And I was the ringmaster, unseen, smiling in the shadows. The barn creaked as I sat down, chest rising slow, calm. The cattle in the field mooed low, restless. They still thought the land was theirs. Soon they'd learn it was never theirs to claim. Tomorrow, I'd strike the cruelest blow yet. Tomorrow, I'd turn them against each other so completely that even if they begged, there'd be no family left to save. And when the dust settled, they'd remember the ghost they buried. Me. By the end of that week, their family dinners had turned into war councils. Neighbors said the curtains at the old farmhouse stayed shut, but the shouting inside was loud enough to rattle the glass. I didn't need to sit on the porch to know what was happening. I'd planted enough seeds to predict the harvest. Mason was the first to break. Desperation has a smell, sharp like spoiled milk, and he carried it everywhere. One night he stumbled into the tavern again, reeking of liquor, ranting about debts, about Ethan dragging him down, about Clara's phony audit. But this time, instead of laughter, he got silence. Nobody wanted to be near a drowning man thrashing for air. By closing time, he was outside in the gravel lot, shouting at the stars like they owed him money. The next morning, word spread. Mason tried to pawn his wedding band, his grandfather's pocket watch, even the boots on his feet. Folks said he looked like a man cornered by his own shadow. Exactly as I wanted. Clara didn't fare better. She showed up at the salon with her letter clutched in her jeweled fingers, demanding everyone believe her innocence. It's a mistake. The government doesn't care about me. But gossip doesn't need truth. It feeds on fear. By sundown, every woman in Maple Hollow was whispering that Clara Whitaker might lose her mansion, her handbags, even her place in church. She went home in tears, mascara streaked down her cheeks, a queen without a crown. And Ethan, Ethan. The inspector's visit had rattled him more than he'd admit. I saw him pacing outside the bank, phone pressed to his ear, barking into the receiver. "Don't you dare freeze my accounts. Do you know who I am?" His voice cracked. He wasn't Ethan the businessman anymore. He was just a boy begging not to lose his toys. I sat in the barn that night, papers spread before me like maps of a battlefield. The smell of dust and oil mixed with the faint sweetness of old hay. My cane rested across my knees. My heart beat steady. I whispered May's name to the rafters, and for a moment, I could almost hear her voice. "Tom, don't lose yourself in this fire." But I wasn't lost. I was found. I tightened the net. I mailed Clara another envelope. This one with copies of Ethan's forged signatures, circled in red. I signed it simply, from a friend. By dusk, she was at Ethan's door, waving the papers in his face, screaming loud enough for the whole street to hear. "You're the reason I'm under investigation. You're dragging us all down." Ethan fired back, accusing her of spreading rumors to cover Mason's gambling debts. Mason, already half drunk, charged at Ethan, fists swinging. Neighbors gathered at their fences, shaking their heads, whispering that the Whitakers had finally rotted from the inside. And still, I stayed in the shadows. By Friday, Mason vanished. Some said he ran off to Riverbend to chase one last poker game. Others swore they saw him hitching a ride out of town. Truth was, I didn't care. He was gone, and gone was enough. Clara locked herself in her mansion, curtains drawn, phones unanswered. Ethan spent his nights at the dealership, sleeping in his office chair, afraid to face the world. The family that threw me out had torn itself apart without a hand raised, without a bullet fired. Just whispers, papers, and their own greed. I leaned back against the barn wall, the lantern glow soft on the wood. My chest ached, not with regret, but with something heavier. Satisfaction. They thought they'd buried me. All they did was dig their own graves. But I wasn't finished. Not yet. The final blow was coming. The one that would silence them forever. They thought I was a ghost, a burden blown away by the wind. But ghosts don't leave footprints, and mine were all over their ruin. The first frost came early that year, a brittle white across the fields at dawn. I stood in the barn doorway, cane steady in my hand, breath misting in the cold air. The cattle lowed in the distance, restless, hungry, unaware their owners had already eaten themselves alive. I had waited long enough in the shadows. It was time to step into the light. I started with Ethan. He was holed up at the dealership, sleeping in his office chair, tie loosened, hair uncombed. The mighty dealer reduced to a shell. I watched him through the glass for an hour, his head jerking awake every few minutes, papers scattered across the desk. When he finally rose, I tapped my cane against the window. Once, twice. He looked up, eyes bloodshot, and froze. For a moment, he thought I was an illusion. The old man he'd signed out of his home, now standing steady under the street lamp. His lips moved, but no words came. I just lifted my cane, pointed at the mess of papers on his desk, and walked away. Let him stew. Let him wonder how much I knew. Next was Clara. She'd shut herself in her mansion, curtains drawn, doors locked. But rumor travels faster than locks hold. I left a small package on her doorstep. Inside, a copy of her audit letter, a photo of Ethan being escorted by inspectors, and a single note in my handwriting. Blood eats blood. Look closer at your brothers. That night, her screams echoed down the block. Neighbors said she smashed glasses against the wall, shouting Ethan's name, cursing Mason for dragging them into shame. But Mason wasn't there to defend himself. He'd vanished, leaving nothing but debts and whispers. And so it was, 3 grandchildren, each alone, each certain the others had betrayed them. All I had to do now was herd them into the same pen. I chose Sunday. They still pretended at appearances, still showed up to church in their best clothes, even as their empire rotted. Folks whispered behind hymnals, but no one dared say it outright. I sat in the back pew, hat low, cane across my lap. When service ended, I waited outside. Ethan spotted me first, stopped dead on the church steps. Clara's gasp followed a second later. For a long moment, neither moved. Just 2 wolves staring at the ghost they thought buried. Mason didn't come. Of course he didn't. Cowards run when the fire grows too hot. Grandpa, Clara's voice cracked like old porcelain. I lifted my head, met her eyes. Still breathing, I said cold, sharp. Disappointed? Ethan stepped forward, anger trying to hide his fear. Where have you been? In the barn, I answered simply. Watching, listening, planning. Their faces drained. For the first time, they understood. I leaned on my cane, voice low but steady. You thought you could trick me with papers. Toss me out like I was a mud underfoot. But those papers? Those words? I taught your fathers how to sign their names. You think I didn't learn the ink, the stamps, the games? Clara shook her head, whispering. It was just business. Business. My voice cut like a whip. Business is sweat on the soil. Business is 30 winters with frozen pipes and a mortgage one bad harvest away from breaking. Business is May, your grandmother, selling her rings so we could keep the cattle fed. And you turned it into handbags and lies. Ethan clenched his fists. You ruined us. No, I said calmly. You ruined yourselves. I just showed you the mirror. Around us, townsfolk lingered, pretending to talk, but their ears sharp. Whitaker's fighting in front of the church, better than any sermon. Clara's mascara streaked, Ethan's jaw tight. I felt May's hand on my shoulder, not gentle this time, but firm, steady, as if telling me, finish it. So I did. I pulled a folded envelope from my coat, thick and worn. This is the will, I said. Their eyes widened. Rewritten. Signed. Witnessed. Filed. Ethan's voice cracked. The farm. Not yours. The house, Clara stammered. Not yours. Then who? She whispered, desperate. I let the silence stretch, heavy, thick, before answering. A boy from the village. Samuel. You remember him, don't you? The orphan who carried water to me when you wouldn't. The one who left bread on my windowsill while you mocked me at the table. Gasps from the crowd. Clara's hand flew to her mouth. Ethan staggered back like I'd struck him. You left me with nothing, I continued. So I left you the same. Nothing but the wreckage you built yourselves. The land, the cattle, the house, they belong to someone who showed kindness without expecting gold. An orphan will inherit your empire because he knew what you forgot. Family feeds each other. Clara sobbed, mascara melting down her face. Ethan cursed under his breath, fists shaking. The crowd whispered louder now, judgment sharp as knives. I turned, came tapping against the stone steps, and began walking away. Behind me, their voices rose, shouts, cries, rage, but none of it mattered. The house was already empty, their trust already dead, their future already signed away. At the edge of town, I paused, looking back once. The church bells tolled noon. Ethan stood frozen, Clara collapsed against the railing, and the townsfolk watching like vultures around a carcass. For a moment, I almost pitied them. Almost. Then I remembered the night they slammed the door in my face, and the pity turned to stone. I adjusted my hat, whispered May's name once more, and walked on. The end wasn't here yet. One more blow remained. One last nail in the coffin. And when it landed, they'd finally understand what it meant to betray the man who built the ground under their feet. The sky was the color of iron when I came back to the farmhouse for the last time. The old place stood hollow, windows dark, the porch sagging under the weight of silence. No laughter, no clatter of dishes, no smell of supper from the kitchen. Just wind and dust. Ethan had tried to hold on after the church debacle. He posted signs outside the dealership, swore to customers he'd bounce back, that the investigation was nothing but a misunderstanding. But the inspectors had found enough to close him down. His accounts were frozen, cars repossessed, reputation shredded. He walked through town with his tie undone, eyes sunken, a man gutted by his own greed. Mason never came back. Rumors said he'd been spotted in Riverbend, drunk and broke, sleeping in a back alley. Others swore he'd left the state entirely. Either way, he was gone, a ghost of dice and empty pockets. And Clara, she stayed locked in her mansion, but I knew the truth. The lights were off now. Creditors had taken her jewels, her cars, even the silver she bragged about polishing for guests. The queen of gossip reduced to silence. Her name was mud at the salon, her friends gone like smoke. I stood in the yard, cane pressed into the frosted earth. The soil I had turned for 50 years. The same soil they'd thought was theirs to claim. They'd divided it before I was even cold, and now it lay bare. Land with no master, a house with no heart. The door creaked when I pushed it open. Inside, the air smelled stale, thick with dust and loss. Stickers still clung to the furniture, bright neon notes where they'd once scribbled "This one's mine." I peeled one from the mantel, held it between my fingers, and laughed. The sound startled me. It had been a long time since I'd laughed. I tossed the sticker into the fireplace and watched it curl to ash. In the hallway, a small figure waited. Samuel, the orphan boy. Thin shoulders, patched jacket, eyes wide but steady. The same boy who used to bring me bread and water when I hid in the barn, who never asked for anything in return. You sure about this, Mr. Whitaker? He asked softly. I nodded. The papers are signed. The farm's yours now. The land, the house, the cattle, all of it. Don't waste it. Feed it. Make it live again. He swallowed hard, eyes shining. I will. I placed the heavy brass keys in his hand. They clinked like a bell, final and sharp. For the first time since May died, I felt the weight lift from my chest. I walked out slowly, cane tapping against the porch boards, each step echoing like a drumbeat of closure. Behind me, Samuel stood in the doorway, holding the keys, holding the future. The wind swept across the fields, carrying with it the last traces of their laughter, their schemes, their arrogance. It was all gone now, burned not by fire, but by their own hunger. At the edge of the driveway, I stopped. Looked back once. The farmhouse stood tall, but empty. Just walls now, stripped of memory, stripped of love. I turned to the road, pulled my coat tight, and whispered to the cold air. They wanted everything. I left them nothing. And I walked on. The house behind me exhaled its silence, and the fields bowed to the frost. I didn't look back again. Last line, I gave them land, but no home.